The morning mist clung to the mountains surrounding Fort Davidson like smoke from a dying fire, and Kate Sullivan moved through it like a ghost. At 32, she had perfected the art of being invisible, her dark brown hair always tucked beneath a worn baseball cap, her hazel eyes downcast as she made her rounds through the weapons storage facility. The other soldiers at the Colorado base knew her simply as Sullivan from maintenance, the quiet woman who could fix any rifle malfunction, and somehow always managed to disappear when conversations turned personal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that those same hands that methodically cleaned and calibrated their weapons had once held the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. What they didn't see was how her fingers instinctively checked sight alignment on every rifle she serviced, or how she unconsciously calculated wind speed and elevation adjustments while standing in the armory doorway watching the distant targets. On the range, Kate had been at Fort Davidson for 6 years, ever since the world had decided that Captain Katherine "Ghost" Sullivan no longer existed. The nickname had been earned in the mountains of Afghanistan, where enemy combatants had whispered stories of an American sniper who could kill from distances that defied belief, who appeared and vanished like morning fog, leaving only the impossible precision of her shots as proof she had ever been there. Now she was just Sullivan, the weapons tech who arrived before dawn and left after sunset, who ate lunch alone while reading technical manuals, and who lived in a small apartment off base where the walls were bare except for a single photograph of the Iowa farmhouse where she'd grown up learning to hunt with her grandfather's rifle. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her days maintaining the tools of war for soldiers who would never be half as skilled with them as she had been. Every rifle she cleaned, every scope she calibrated, every malfunction she diagnosed, was both a reminder of what she'd lost and a testament to skills that couldn't be stripped away by court proceedings or fraudulent investigations. Her morning routine never varied. Clock in at 5:30, check the overnight maintenance requests, begin systematic inspection of weapons scheduled for range time. The M4 carbines were straightforward, reliable platforms that rarely gave trouble. The M24 sniper rifles required more attention, and Kate found herself lingering over these, her hands moving with the unconscious precision of someone who understood these weapons at a molecular level. Sergeant First Class Tom Mitchell found her there, as he did most mornings, methodically field stripping a rifle that other technicians had declared beyond repair. Mitchell was one of the few people on base who treated her as more than just another maintenance worker, though he couldn't understand why someone with her evident expertise had never pursued advanced training or promotion. "Morning, Sullivan," Mitchell said, settling his coffee cup on the workbench. "Got another impossible case for you." He gestured toward the rifle in her hands. 3 different techs have worked on that thing. Groupings are all over the place, but nobody can find the problem. Kate didn't look up from her work, but her voice carried quiet confidence. "Barrel harmonics are off. Crown damage, probably from improper cleaning. The rifle's accurate, but the bullet's destabilizing as it exits the muzzle." Her fingers moved to a section of the barrel that looked identical to every other inch. Here, microscopic burr from someone using a steel rod without proper guidance. Mitchell leaned closer, squinting at the area she indicated. To his eyes, the metal looked perfect. "I don't see anything. It's there." Kate's voice held no arrogance, just certainty born from thousands of hours behind similar weapons. "Give me 20 minutes to address the crown and rebed the action. It'll shoot sub-Neola groups." She was right, of course. She was always right when it came to weapons, which had started to earn her a reputation among the maintenance staff that she found increasingly uncomfortable. Recognition meant questions, and questions led to scrutiny she couldn't afford. The truth was that Kate Sullivan had learned to shoot on the rolling hills of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where her grandfather had taught her that marksmanship was equal parts science and art, discipline, and instinct. By age 12, she could consistently hit targets at ranges that impressed seasoned hunters. By 16, she was out shooting men twice her age at local competitions, her natural ability refined by obsessive practice and an intuitive understanding of ballistics that seemed almost supernatural. The military had recognized her talent immediately. After basic training, she'd been fast-tracked through advanced marksmanship schools, earning instructor ratings and setting records that would stand for years. Her commanders had pushed her towards special operations, where her skills could be utilized in the most demanding environments. Captain Kate Sullivan had been one of the youngest soldiers ever selected for the Army's elite sniper program, and she'd graduated at the top of her class with scores that instructors called impossible. Her psychological evaluation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Had noted exceptional patience, emotional stability under pressure, and the rare combination of analytical intelligence and intuitive decision-making that defined elite marksmen. The deployment to Afghanistan had been her proving ground. Forward Operating Base Thunder sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that provided perfect overwatch positions for anyone skilled enough to use them. The Taliban had learned to fear the ghost, the American sniper who could reach out and touch them from distances they thought were safe. Her longest confirmed kill had come during Operation Iron Storm, a mission to extract a downed helicopter crew from hostile territory. At 1,847 meters, in crosswinds gusting to 25 miles per hour, she had eliminated a Taliban commander who was directing the attack on the crash site. The shot had required calculations that most snipers couldn't make with unlimited time and perfect conditions. Kate had made it in 12 seconds, under fire, with lives hanging in the balance. That same mission had destroyed everything she'd worked for, though she wouldn't learn the full extent of the betrayal for years. Colonel Marcus Webb had been her commanding officer, a career soldier with political ambitions and a network of contacts throughout the Pentagon. To the outside world, he was the perfect military leader, decorated veteran, inspiring commander who pushed his soldiers to excel. Kate had trusted him completely, relied on his tactical judgment, and never questioned the intelligence reports he provided. She hadn't known that Webb was selling operational details to the highest bidder, that every mission she completed successfully was generating profits for his network of corrupt contacts. The helicopter that had gone down during Iron Storm hadn't been a victim of mechanical failure as reported. It had been shot down because Webb had sold its flight path to Taliban forces, turning a routine supply run into an ambush that killed 4 American soldiers. When the investigation began, Webb had needed a scapegoat. Kate's exceptional skills made her perfect for the role, someone competent enough to be believably portrayed as having acted recklessly, but isolated enough to be eliminated without significant resistance. She was a woman in a male-dominated field, an outsider without the political connections to mount an effective defense. The fabricated evidence had been masterful in its thoroughness. Radio transcripts showing her ignoring direct orders, falsified. After-action reports describing reckless endangerment of friendly forces. Testimony from soldiers who had been coerced or bought. By the time Kate understood what was happening, the machinery of military justice was already grinding her career to dust. The court-martial had been swift and merciless. Captain Kate Sullivan, holder of the longest confirmed sniper kill record, instructor-rated marksman, and decorated combat veteran, was found guilty of reckless endangerment, failure to follow orders, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. She was stripped of rank, forfeited all pay and allowances, and given a dishonorable discharge that would follow her for the rest of her life. The only person who had believed in her innocence was General Patricia Morgan, a legendary soldier who had broken barriers for women in combat throughout her career. Morgan had been scheduled to testify on Kate's behalf, armed with evidence that would have exposed Webb's corruption. But Webb's network had reached throughout the military hierarchy, and Morgan had been suddenly reassigned to a NATO command position in Germany. Her testimony ruled inadmissible due to her absence. Kate had left the military with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to disappear completely. She'd legally changed her name, moved across the country, and spent months learning to suppress the skills that had once defined her identity. The woman who had once been called Ghost became truly invisible, hiding in plain sight among the very institution that had betrayed her. Fort Davidson had been chosen deliberately. It was a training facility, focused on preparing soldiers for combat rather than conducting special operations. The weapons maintenance position required security clearance that her military experience provided, but didn't involve the kind of high-profile assignments that might attract attention from her former colleagues. For 6 years, Kate had maintained perfect anonymity. She performed her duties competently, but not exceptionally, spoke when spoken to, but never volunteered information, and carefully avoided any situation that might require her to demonstrate the skills that could give away her true identity. The morning routine had become a meditation, a way of maintaining connection to her former self without risking exposure. Each weapon she serviced was handled with the reverence of someone who understood that these tools might mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers who carried them. She couldn't save the 4 men who had died because of Webb's betrayal, but she could ensure that every rifle left her hands in perfect condition. Sergeant Mitchell watched her work with the fascination of someone witnessing artistry. Kate's hands moved with unconscious precision, disassembling and reassembling mechanisms without conscious thought, her fingers finding problems that electronic diagnostics had missed. "Sullivan," Mitchell said finally, "I've been meaning to ask. You ever think about applying for instructor positions? Advanced Marksmanship School is always looking for qualified personnel, and you've got more knowledge about these systems than anyone I've met." Kate's hands stilled for just a moment, a barely perceptible pause that Mitchell didn't notice, but that sent alarm signals through her nervous system. "I'm comfortable where I am, Sergeant. Maintenance suits me fine. But you're wasted here." Mitchell pressed, his voice carrying genuine concern. "I've seen you diagnose problems that stump engineers with advanced degrees. You could be teaching the next generation of marksmen, helping them understand these weapons the way you do." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. Kate returned to her work, but Mitchell's words had awakened something she'd spent 6 years trying to bury. The truth was that she missed teaching, missed the satisfaction of watching young soldiers develop skills that might keep them alive in combat. Before she could respond, the armory's main door banged open. With the force of someone accustomed to making dramatic entrances, General Brandon Hayes strode in like he owned not just the building, but the entire concept of military authority. At 45, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions, his perfectly pressed uniform displaying ribbons that spoke more of political connections than combat experience. Hayes had been assigned to Fort Davidson 6 months earlier, brought in to oversee the new combat readiness assessment program that would evaluate soldiers across multiple specialties. His family's connections ran deep through military and political circles, and his assignment to the prestigious training facility was seen as a stepping stone to even higher command positions. Kate had avoided direct contact with Hayes, but she'd observed him during his visits to the weapons facility. He treated enlisted personnel with casual dismissiveness, addressed female soldiers with barely concealed condescension, and demonstrated the kind of leadership style that confused authority with bullying. "Sergeant Mitchell," Hayes announced, his voice cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the armory like a blade. "I need a complete inventory of all sniper weapon systems. The assessment teams want detailed reports on accuracy capabilities and maintenance status. Mitchell straightened to attention. Yes, sir. We can have those reports ready by close of business today. Hayes's gaze swept the armory, taking in the various workstations and weapon storage areas with the calculating air of someone looking for problems to solve. His eyes settled on Kate, who had continued working on the rifle in her hands, her posture respectful but not subservient. And who is this? Hayes asked, his tone carrying the implicit assumption that Kate should have immediately stopped what she was doing to acknowledge his presence. Specialist Sullivan, sir, Mitchell replied. Our senior weapons maintenance technician. She's the one who handles our most complex repairs and calibration issues. Hayes approached Kate's workstation with the measured stride of someone accustomed to having people scramble to attention in his presence. Kate set down her tools and turned to face him, her posture correct but her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that seemed to irritate him. Sullivan, Hayes said, his voice carrying practiced authority. I assume you're familiar with all the weapon systems in this facility. Yes, sir, Kate replied, her voice neutral and professional. I maintain accuracy and functionality standards for all assigned weapons. Hayes picked up one of the rifles from her workbench, a customized M24 system that she'd been preparing for range testing. His handling of the weapon was competent but careless, the grip of someone who viewed firearms as tools rather than precision instruments deserving respect. This is nice work, Hayes said, though his tone suggested he was offering praise to a child who had managed not to break something valuable. I assume this level of precision comes from following technical manuals rather than actual shooting experience. The question was loaded with condescension, the assumption that a maintenance technician couldn't possibly understand weapons from a user's perspective. Kate's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. I follow established procedures and manufacturer specifications, sir. The goal is optimal performance for the operators who depend on these weapons. Hayes nodded as if her response confirmed his assumptions. Good answer. It's important for support personnel to understand their role in the larger mission. He gestured toward the range visible through the armory's windows. Though I suspect you've never actually fired any of these weapons in a tactical environment. No, sir, Kate lied smoothly. My experience is limited to maintenance and testing procedures. Hayes smiled, the expression of someone who enjoyed having his assumptions validated. He was about to respond when his attention was drawn to something that made his demeanor shift completely. Sitting on Kate's personal tool cart, secured in a custom holster, was her sidearm, a modified 1911 pistol that she was authorized to carry as part of her security clearance. The weapon was clearly not standard issue. The frame had been worked over by a master gunsmith with custom grips, an enhanced trigger system, and modifications that spoke of serious investment and expertise. Most tellingly, the slide bore engravings that included a small ghost symbol and a series of numbers that Hayes, despite his limited combat experience, recognized as range and target notations. Without asking permission, Hayes reached for the pistol, his fingers closing around the grip with casual presumption. The moment his hand touched the weapon, Kate's entire body went rigid, years of suppressed instincts screaming warnings that she forced herself to ignore. Now this is interesting, Hayes said, drawing the pistol from its holster and examining it with the air of someone who had discovered something valuable. This is definitely not standard issue. Custom work, expensive modifications. His eyes found the ghost engraving and the range notations. What's all this about, Sullivan? Kate's voice came out tighter than she intended. Personal sidearm, sir. Authorized for carry by security personnel. Hayes continued his examination, his handling of the weapon becoming increasingly careless as his interest grew. He pointed it in various directions, his finger near the trigger guard in violation of basic safety protocols, his grip shifting the carefully adjusted sights that Kate had spent hours perfecting. These numbers, Hayes said, indicating the engravings. They look like range calculations, distance markers. His tone grew skeptical. Seems like quite a lot of precision for someone whose shooting experience is limited to testing procedures. The moment stretched like a held breath. Kate could feel Mitchell's eyes on her, could sense his growing concern as he watched Hayes handle her weapon with increasing carelessness. Every instinct developed over years of combat told her to take control of the situation, to protect her equipment from someone who clearly didn't understand its value. "Sir," Kate said carefully, "if you're finished examining the weapon, I'd prefer to secure it properly. Armory safety protocols." Hayes looked up from the pistol with raised eyebrows, clearly unused to having his actions questioned by enlisted personnel. "I don't recall asking for your input, Specialist. I'm conducting an inspection of equipment under my command." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged round, loaded with implications that went far beyond the simple examination of a sidearm. Kate felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads, facing a choice between the safety of anonymity and the dangerous territory of standing up for herself. Hayes continued his examination of the pistol, his handling growing more careless with each passing moment. He worked the action unnecessarily, adjusted controls that Kate had spent considerable time calibrating, and generally treated the precision instrument like a toy that existed for his entertainment. Interesting craftsmanship, Hayes mused, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was creating. Though I have to wonder why a maintenance technician needs this level of customization. Seems like quite an investment for someone who doesn't actually use these weapons operationally. Kate's hands clenched involuntarily at her sides, muscle memory from countless hours of weapons handling, creating an almost physical need to take control of her sidearm. She forced her voice to remain level, professional, but those who knew her well might have detected the steel beneath her words. "The weapon meets all regulatory requirements, sir. Personal modifications are within authorized parameters." Hayes looked up from the pistol with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm not questioning the legality, Sullivan. Just curious about the practicality. After all, what's the point of all these precision modifications if you're never going to need precision shooting?" Mitchell, watching the exchange with growing discomfort, stepped forward slightly. "Sir, Specialist Sullivan is one of our most reliable technicians. Her equipment maintenance records are exemplary." Hayes waved off Mitchell's intervention with casual dismissal. "I'm sure her maintenance work is adequate, Sergeant. But this weapon suggests someone with aspirations beyond their actual capabilities." He gestured with the pistol toward the range visible through the windows. "Tell me, Sullivan, when's the last time you actually fired this thing? And I mean really fired it, not just function testing." The question was another trap, Kate realized. Any answer that demonstrated real shooting experience would raise questions about her background that she couldn't afford to have asked. But claiming complete inexperience with her own sidearm would be equally problematic. "I maintain qualification standards as required, sir," she said finally. The answer technically accurate, but deliberately vague. Hayes nodded as if this response confirmed his assessment. "Qualification standards, right." His tone dripped with condescension. "So you can hit a stationary target at 25 yards under perfect conditions. Very impressive." The sarcasm was unmistakable, designed to humiliate and diminish. Kate felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same sensation she'd experienced during her court-martial when men with far less skill and experience had sat in judgment of her abilities. Difference was that now she had a choice in how to respond. Hayes was still examining her pistol, his careless handling causing Kate to wince internally as he knocked the sights out of alignment and left fingerprints on surfaces she kept meticulously clean. When he finally looked up, his expression carried the satisfied air of someone who believed he'd proven a point. "You know what, Sullivan? I think it might be educational for everyone if you demonstrated these precision capabilities you've invested so much money in developing." His smile widened. After all, the combat readiness assessment is all about ensuring our people can actually perform under pressure. What do you say we head over to the range and see what all these modifications can actually accomplish? Part 2. The daily struggle. The challenge hung in the air between them like cordite from a fired round. Kate felt every eye in the armory focused on her response, measuring her reaction to Hayes' calculated provocation. Mitchell's expression had shifted from discomfort to concern, recognizing that his technician was being backed into a corner by a superior officer who seemed to take pleasure in the exercise. Kate's mind raced through possible responses, each one carrying risks she'd spent 6 years learning to avoid. Accepting Hayes' challenge would mean demonstrating skills that might raise questions about her background. Refusing would mark her as weak in front of colleagues who had come to respect her competence. Either choice threatened the careful anonymity she'd constructed around her new identity. "I appreciate the offer, sir," Kate said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "But I have several priority maintenance requests that need completion today. Perhaps another time would be more appropriate." Hayes' smile grew wider, the expression of a predator that had scented weakness. "Oh, I think those maintenance requests can wait, Specialist. After all, what's more important than ensuring our weapons technicians understand the equipment they're servicing?" He gestured again with her pistol, his careless handling making Kate's jaw tighten. "I insist." The word carried the weight of command authority, transforming what had been presented as a suggestion into a direct order. Kate recognized the trap's completion, the careful maneuvering that had eliminated her options while maintaining the pretense that she had a choice in the matter. Mitchell stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his natural deference to superior officers. "Sir, with respect, Specialist Sullivan's maintenance duties are critical to range operations. We have 3 training exercises scheduled for this afternoon that depend on weapons she's currently servicing." Hayes turned his attention to Mitchell with the same dismissive air he'd shown Kate. "Sergeant, I'm sure the range operations can survive without one technician for 30 minutes. Besides, this is educational, official business related to the combat readiness assessment." His tone hardened slightly. "Unless you're questioning the priorities I've established for this evaluation." Mitchell's position was even more precarious than Kate's. Challenging a general's direct orders would be career suicide, regardless of the circumstances. He looked at Kate with an expression that mixed apology with helpless frustration, caught between his desire to protect his technician and the realities of military hierarchy. "No, sir," Mitchell replied quietly. "Of course not." Hayes nodded with satisfaction, then returned his attention to Kate. "Excellent, then it's settled." He finally holstered her pistol, but his handling of the weapon had left visible smudges on the slide and knocked the carefully adjusted sights noticeably out of alignment. "Grab whatever additional equipment you think you'll need, Sullivan. Let's see what those expensive modifications can actually accomplish." Kate felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down, the heightened awareness that had once served her in combat situations now activated by a different kind of threat. She could see the trap closing around her with mechanical precision, each word and gesture calculated to force her into a position where hiding her true abilities would be impossible. The walk to the range felt like a death march. Kate carried her pistol case and a small toolkit, her movements automatic while her mind processed the implications of what was about to unfold. Hayes walked beside her with the confident stride of someone anticipating entertainment, occasionally making comments about the importance of realistic assessment and the need for support personnel to understand their limitations. Word of the impromptu shooting demonstration had spread through the base's informal communication network with the speed that gossip travels in military environments. By the time they reached Range 7, a small crowd had gathered, ostensibly engaged in their own training activities, but clearly positioned to observe whatever was about to happen. Lieutenant Jessica Carter was among the observers, a recent academy graduate who served as Hayes's aide-de-camp. Carter had earned her position through genuine merit rather than political connections, and she'd spent the past 6 months watching Hayes's leadership style with growing unease. She recognized the pattern of what was happening, the systematic humiliation of someone Hayes perceived as vulnerable. Private Danny Rodriguez from the motor pool had also found an excuse to be nearby. He'd worked with Kate on several occasions when weapons needed to be transported for off-base training, and he'd always been impressed by her quiet competence and willingness to help others. Watching her being forced into this demonstration made his protective instincts flare. Kate began setting up at the range with methodical precision, her movements economical and professional despite the emotional turmoil beneath the surface. She inspected the pistol, noting the damage Hayes's handling had caused, and began the process of realigning the sights and checking the weapon's zero. "Take your time," Hayes called out from the observation area, his voice carrying to the gathered crowd. "I want everyone to see a thorough demonstration of maintenance-level marksmanship skills." The comment drew quiet chuckles from some observers, the easy cruelty of those who enjoyed watching someone else's discomfort. But Carter noticed that several of the more experienced soldiers weren't laughing. There was something about Kate's handling of the weapon that suggested familiarity beyond mere technical knowledge. Kate worked through her preparations with the ritualistic precision of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times. She checked the ammunition, verified the weapon's condition, and established her shooting position with unconscious competence. Every movement spoke of deep familiarity with firearms, though she tried to keep her actions within the bounds of what a typical technician might know. Hayes had selected targets at 25 yards, standard qualification distance for pistol shooting. The targets were regulation silhouettes, black shapes on white paper that represented the minimum standard for military marksmanship. For most soldiers, hitting these targets consistently required concentration and careful technique. For Kate, they represented a challenge roughly equivalent to hitting the broad side of a barn from inside it. "Whenever you're ready, specialist," Hayes announced. "Let's see what all those custom modifications can accomplish in capable hands." The final insult was delivered with surgical precision, the implication that Kate's hands were somehow incapable of utilizing the equipment she'd invested in. She felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same emotion that had sustained her through 6 years of exile and humiliation. Kate settled into her shooting stance, the modified grip of her pistol fitting her hands like it had been grown there. The weapon's weight distribution, trigger pull, and sight picture were as familiar as her own reflection. For a moment, muscle memory threatened to take over completely, her body preparing to demonstrate capabilities that would shatter her carefully constructed disguise. She forced herself to slow down, to shoot like a competent but unremarkable technician rather than like someone who had once held records that other marksmen considered impossible. Her first shot struck the target in the 9 ring, slightly off-center but well within acceptable parameters. Hayes nodded approvingly from the observation area. "Not bad, Sullivan. Though I notice you're taking quite a bit of time between shots. Real combat doesn't allow for that kind of deliberate aiming." Kate fired 4 more rounds, each one hitting within the target's scoring rings, but demonstrating exactly the kind of competent mediocrity that Hayes expected from a maintenance technician. She was performing well enough to justify her possession of the custom weapon, but not so well as to raise questions about her background. "Adequate," Hayes pronounced when Kate had finished the standard qualification course. "Though I have to say, those expensive modifications don't seem to be providing much advantage over a standard-issue sidearm." His smile carried satisfaction at having his assumptions confirmed. "Perhaps you should consider investing in training rather than equipment next time." The gathered crowd began to disperse, the anticipated entertainment having proven less dramatic than expected. Carter lingered longer than the others, something about the demonstration nagging at her professional instincts. Kate had shot well, but there had been something almost deliberate about her mediocrity, as if she were carefully controlling her performance rather than simply demonstrating her capabilities. Kate began cleaning her weapon and preparing to return to her duties, relieved that the ordeal was over and her secret remained intact. Hayes had gotten his entertainment, proven his point about the limitations of support personnel, and would presumably move on to other targets for his casual cruelty. But Hayes wasn't finished. As Kate packed her equipment, he approached with the stride of someone who had just thought of an additional way to demonstrate his superiority. "You know, Sullivan," Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly to the remaining observers, "I'm curious about something. Those engravings on your pistol, the range markings, and that little ghost symbol. Where exactly did those come from?" Kate's hands stilled on her equipment case. "Custom work, sir. The previous owner had them done." "The previous owner?" Hayes's eyebrows rose. "So this isn't originally your weapon?" "No, sir. I purchased it used from a private seller." The lie came smoothly, but Kate could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet once again. Hayes nodded slowly, his expression suggesting he was working through some mental calculation. "Interesting. And you never thought to have those markings removed? After all, they suggest a level of precision shooting that you've just demonstrated you don't actually possess." The trap was springing again, Kate realized, but from a different direction this time. Hayes wasn't finished humiliating her, wasn't satisfied with the demonstration of adequate mediocrity she'd provided. He wanted something more dramatic, more definitively embarrassing. "Actually," Hayes continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had just had an inspired idea, "I think we should try something a bit more challenging. After all, if you're going to carry a precision weapon with custom modifications, shouldn't you be able to demonstrate precision shooting?" Lieutenant Carter, still observing from nearby, felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen this pattern before during Hayes's previous assignments, the systematic escalation designed to create maximum humiliation for the target. Hayes never settled for simply proving his point. He needed to crush his victims completely. "Sir," Kate said carefully, "I believe I've demonstrated appropriate competency for my assigned duties." Hayes waved off her response with casual dismissal. "Appropriate competency for basic qualification, perhaps. But look at this weapon, Sullivan." He gestured toward her pistol case. "Custom barrel work, precision trigger system, enhanced sights. Someone invested serious money in creating a precision shooting platform. Don't you think we owe it to that craftsmanship to see what it can really accomplish?" Mitchell, who had remained silent during the initial demonstration, finally found his voice. "Sir, Specialist Sullivan has duties to complete. The afternoon training exercises depend on weapons she's currently servicing." Hayes turned to Mitchell with an expression that could have frozen water. "Sergeant, I thought we'd already established the priorities for this assessment. Or do I need to make my expectations clearer?" The threat was unmistakable. Mitchell's face flushed with anger and frustration, but he stepped back without another word. Hayes had effectively isolated Kate from any potential support, leaving her to face whatever additional humiliation he had planned. "Now then," Hayes continued, his attention returning to Kate, "let's see what real precision looks like. We'll move the targets back to 50 yards, add some wind conditions, maybe introduce a time limit. After all, those range markings on your pistol suggest someone expected to shoot at distances well beyond qualification standards." Kate felt the walls closing in around her carefully constructed new life. Every option led to danger. Refusing Hayes's escalated challenge would mark her as defiant and potentially result in disciplinary action that could cost her the job that provided both income and cover. Accepting the challenge and failing would give Hayes the dramatic failure he clearly wanted, but success would raise questions about her background that she couldn't answer safely. But there was a third option, one that had been growing in her mind since Hayes first touched her weapon without permission. Kate had spent 6 years suppressing her true capabilities, hiding her identity and allowing lesser individuals to treat her with contempt she didn't deserve. Perhaps it was time to remind the world that some skills couldn't be stolen by corrupt officers or erased by fraudulent court proceedings. Carter watched Kate's posture change subtly, a straightening of the spine and squaring of the shoulders. That suggested some internal decision had been reached. For the first time since arriving at the range, Kate looked directly at Hayes with an expression that carried steel beneath its surface calm. "What did you have in mind, sir?" Kate asked, her voice carrying a new undertone that made Carter's tactical instincts suddenly alert. Hayes smiled broadly, clearly delighted that his target was finally engaging with his game. "Well, since you're carrying a precision weapon, let's test some precision shooting. 50-yard targets, timed fire, maybe some challenging positions." He paused, his smile growing more predatory. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to admit that the weapon is beyond your actual capabilities." Kate nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I understand, sir. 50 yards, precision demonstration." She paused, meeting Hayes's gaze directly. "How precise did you want this to be?" There was something in her tone that made Carter take a step closer, her professional instincts suddenly screaming warnings she couldn't quite identify. Hayes, however, seemed oblivious to any change in the dynamic, too focused on his anticipated triumph to notice the subtle shift in his target's demeanor. "Oh, let's make it interesting," Hayes said, his voice carrying to the remaining observers. "Let's see if you can actually utilize those expensive modifications you've invested in." Kate began repacking her equipment with movements that had somehow become more economical, more purposeful. "Very well, sir. But if we're going to test precision capabilities, perhaps we should establish appropriate parameters." Hayes nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. What do you suggest?" Kate's smile was barely perceptible, but Carter caught it and felt a chill of anticipation she couldn't explain. "Well, sir, if we're testing the weapon's precision modifications, we should probably use targets that actually require precision to hit." The game was about to change completely, though Hayes didn't realize it yet. Kate had made her choice, and the consequences would reshape everything that followed. Part 3. The Former Glory. The conversation at the range had drawn additional attention. From across the base, soldiers and officers finding excuses to observe what had become an increasingly tense confrontation between a general and a maintenance technician. Word had spread that Hayes was conducting some kind of impromptu evaluation, and the gathering crowd carried the anticipatory energy of spectators expecting entertainment. Kate stood at the firing line with her equipment case open beside her. But she hadn't moved to prepare for Hayes's enhanced challenge. Instead, she was studying the range with the careful attention of someone making tactical calculations. Her gaze swept across the targets, measured distances, noted wind conditions and lighting angles with an unconscious precision that Carter was beginning to recognize as deeply ingrained professional assessment. "Problem, Sullivan?" Hayes called. From the observation area, his voice carrying irritation at the delay. "I thought you were ready to demonstrate these precision capabilities." Kate turned to face him, her posture somehow different than it had been moments before. "Sir, if we're going to conduct a meaningful assessment of precision shooting capabilities, we should establish clear parameters and appropriate targets." Her voice carried new authority, the tone of someone who actually understood what they were discussing. "Standard qualification targets at 50 yards don't really test precision equipment." Hayes frowned, clearly not expecting this response from someone he'd been systematically humiliating for the past hour. "What are you suggesting, specialist?" "Well, sir," Kate replied, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining technical concepts to a novice. Precision shooting is typically measured in minutes of angle rather than simple hit or miss. If we're testing equipment modifications designed for accuracy, We should use targets that actually require accuracy to engage effectively. Lieutenant Carter felt her pulse quicken as she recognized something fundamental shifting in the dynamic. Kate wasn't speaking like a maintenance technician anymore. She was speaking like someone with deep technical knowledge of precision marksmanship. The change was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone with actual shooting experience. Hayes, however, seemed to interpret Kate's comments as an attempt to avoid the challenge he'd set. "Are you trying to complicate this because you're having second thoughts about your abilities, Sullivan?" Kate shook her head slowly. "No, sir. I'm trying to ensure we conduct a proper evaluation." She gestured toward the standard targets. "Those silhouettes are designed for basic qualification shooting. If you want to test precision modifications, we need precision targets." "Fine," Hayes said, his voice sharp with irritation. "What do you suggest?" Kate pointed toward a section of the range where smaller targets were used for advanced marksmanship training. "Those targets are marked in 1-inch squares. They'll provide measurable results for precision shooting evaluation." She paused, meeting Hayes's gaze directly. "If that's what you really want to test." The challenge in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Carter realized that Kate was no longer simply responding to Hayes's harassment. She was beginning to take control of the situation. The change was so gradual that Hayes didn't seem to notice, but to Carter's trained eye, the power dynamic was shifting. Hayes waved dismissively toward the precision targets. "Whatever you think you need, Sullivan. Just remember that talk is cheap. Results are what matter." Kate nodded and began walking toward the target frames, her movement purposeful, in a way that made Carter follow without conscious decision. As they reached the target area, Kate began making adjustments to the frame positioning with the efficiency of someone who had performed these actions countless times. "What distance did you have in mind, sir?" Kate called back to Hayes. 50 yards, replied. "That should be challenging enough for someone of your experience level." Kate paused in her target preparation. "Sir, precision shooting at 50 yards with a pistol is actually quite manageable with proper equipment and technique. If you want to truly test the weapon's capabilities, we might consider a more challenging distance." Carter moved closer, fascinated by Kate's growing confidence. There was something hypnotic about watching her work, the economical movements and unconscious competence that spoke of extensive experience. "What distance would you recommend?" Carter found herself asking. Kate looked up from the target frame, and for a moment, Carter saw something in her eyes that made her breath catch. There was depth there, layers of experience and knowledge that didn't belong in the gaze of a simple maintenance technician. "For precision pistol work," Kate said thoughtfully, 100 yards is where it starts to get interesting. The ballistic arc becomes a factor, wind begins to matter, and you really need to understand your equipment." She smiled slightly. Of course, that might be beyond what General Hayes had in mind for this demonstration. Hayes had moved closer during the target setup, and he caught Kate's comment with obvious irritation. "Are you suggesting that 100 yards is beyond my expectations, Specialist?" "Not at all, sir," Kate replied smoothly. "I was simply noting that precision shooting at extended ranges requires different skills than basic qualification shooting." She gestured toward the targets she was preparing. "If you'd prefer to keep this at 50 yards, that's perfectly acceptable." The careful phrasing made Hayes's face flush slightly. Kate was offering him an easy way to maintain face while backing down from his challenge, but she was doing it in a way that made refusing seem like acceptance of limitations. Carter recognized the tactical maneuvering, the subtle psychological pressure that was beginning to turn Hayes' own methods against him. 100 yards will be fine," Hayes said stiffly. "I'm sure we can all learn something from watching you attempt precision shooting at that distance." Kate nodded acknowledgement and continued her target preparation. As she worked, Carter noticed details that had escaped her attention earlier. Kate's hands moved with absolute confidence as she adjusted target frames and checked angles. Her positioning, of the target showed understanding of sightlines and measurement that went far beyond basic technical knowledge. "Have you done much precision shooting, Sullivan?" Carter asked quietly as Kate finished her preparations. Kate paused, and Carter caught another glimpse of something deeper in her expression. "Some," Kate replied carefully. "It's important to understand the equipment you're maintaining." The answer was technically accurate but revealed nothing, Carter realized. Kate had become expert at providing responses that satisfied curiosity without actually sharing information. The skill suggested someone who had learned to guard her background carefully. They returned to the firing line where Hayes had positioned himself to observe with the air of someone expecting to witness failure. The crowd of observers had grown slightly, drawn by word that something unusual was happening at range 7. Most expected to see a maintenance technician struggle with a challenge beyond her capabilities, providing entertainment and validating their assumptions about the limitations of support personnel. Kate began her final equipment preparation with methodical precision. She checked her pistol's condition, verified the sight alignment that Hayes's earlier handling had disturbed, and loaded magazines with the careful attention of someone who understood that every detail mattered in precision shooting. Carter watched Kate's pre-shooting routine with growing fascination. Every movement showed familiarity that went far beyond occasional recreational shooting. Kate's stance, grip, and sight alignment demonstrated muscle memory developed through extensive training and practice. "Interesting technique," Carter commented quietly. Kate glanced at her. "Standard precision shooting fundamentals. Sight alignment. Trigger control. Follow through." She paused. "Though I suppose most people don't pay much attention to the technical aspects." "You seem to know quite a bit about the technical aspects," Carter observed. "It's part of maintaining the equipment properly," Kate replied. "Hard to service weapons effectively if you don't understand how they're supposed to function." The explanation was logical, but Carter was beginning to suspect there was more to Kate's knowledge than equipment maintenance would explain. She filed the observation away for future consideration. Hayes called out from the observation area, his voice carrying impatience. "Are you ready, Sullivan? Or do you need more time to prepare for this demonstration of your precision capabilities?" Kate took her position at the firing line, her stance settling into something that made Carter's breath catch. The position was textbook perfect, demonstrating balance, stability, and sight alignment that belonged in advanced marksmanship instruction rather than basic qualification shooting. "Ready, sir," Kate called back, her voice steady. "Then let's see what those expensive modifications can accomplish," Hayes replied. "Take your time. We want to see your best effort." Kate raised her pistol and aligned her sights on the target 100 yards downrange. For a moment, she was completely still, her breathing controlled, her position locked with the stability of someone who had learned to shoot under conditions where missing meant death. Carter found herself holding her breath as Kate's finger moved to the trigger. There was something about Kate's complete stillness, her absolute focus, that suggested capabilities far beyond what anyone expected. The moment stretched like a held breath, and Carter realized she was witnessing something that would change everything. Kate's finger began its steady pressure on the trigger, and the world held its collective breath, waiting for the revelation that would shatter all assumptions about the quiet woman who had spent 6 years hiding in plain sight among the very institution that had betrayed her. Part 4. The betrayal explanation. The shot rang out across range 7 with the crisp authority of a precision weapon fired by someone who understood its capabilities completely. But what followed the report wasn't the scattered impact of someone struggling with an unfamiliar challenge. Instead, there was the subtle thump of a bullet striking paper with surgical precision, a sound that made Carter's professional instincts suddenly alert. Kate lowered her pistol and stood motionless, her breathing controlled, her stance unchanged. She hadn't moved to check the target or shown any of the uncertainty that would be expected from someone attempting shooting beyond their skill level. Instead, she simply waited with the patience of someone who knew exactly what she had accomplished. Hayes walked downrange to examine the target, his stride confident as he anticipated confirming Kate's limitations. The gathered observers followed at a distance, expecting to witness the kind of dramatic miss that would validate their assumptions about the capabilities of maintenance personnel. But when Hayes reached the target frame, his confident stride faltered. He stared at the target for several seconds, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion to something approaching disbelief. The bullet hole was centered in the 1-inch square Kate had aimed at, placed with surgical precision that would have been impressive at 50 yards and was nearly impossible at 100. "That's—" Hayes started, then stopped, his voice trailing off as he processed what he was seeing. Carter moved closer to examine the target herself, her pulse quickening as she realized the implications of what Kate had accomplished. The shot placement wasn't lucky or accidental. It was the result of skill and experience that belonged in elite marksmanship competitions rather than routine qualification shooting. "How did you—" Hayes began, then caught himself, his expression hardening as he realized that his assumptions about Kate's capabilities had been completely wrong. Kate remained at the firing line, her posture relaxed but alert. "Was the shot placement acceptable, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying a neutrality that somehow made the question sound like a challenge. Hayes studied the target again, clearly struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with his preconceptions. "This is—" He paused, searching for words that would maintain his authority while acknowledging what had just happened. Unusual accuracy for someone with limited shooting experience. "Yes, sir," Kate replied, offering no explanation or excuse for her performance. The response frustrated Hayes, who had expected either failure that would confirm his assumptions or success, accompanied by the kind of excited explanation that would diminish the achievement. Kate's calm acceptance of her own precision was somehow more unsettling than dramatic celebration would have been. Carter found herself studying Kate with new interest, recognizing that everything she thought she knew about the quiet maintenance technician had just been revealed as incomplete. The shot Kate had just made required not just skill, but extensive training and experience that couldn't be explained by occasional recreational shooting or equipment maintenance duties. "Let's see another one," Hayes said finally, his voice carrying forced casualness. "One shot could be luck." Kate nodded acknowledgement and raised her pistol again. Her stance was identical to before, demonstrating the kind of consistent positioning that came from thousands of hours of practice. She settled into her sight picture with the same controlled breathing and absolute stillness that had preceded her first shot. The second shot produced the same crisp report and the same subtle impact sound. Hayes walked downrange again, his expression already tightening as he realized what he would find. The second bullet hole was placed less than half an inch from the first, creating a group that would have been impressive from a bencherist at half the distance. "Acceptable grouping, sir?" Kate asked when Hayes returned from examining the target. Hayes's frustration was becoming visible despite his attempts to maintain composure. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that, specialist?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. Kate had been dreading this moment for 6 years. The inevitable inquiry that would force her to choose between revealing her background and constructing lies that might not withstand scrutiny. "I grew up in rural Iowa, sir," Kate replied, choosing her words carefully. Hunting and target shooting were family traditions. The answer was technically accurate, but revealed nothing about the extent of her training and experience. Hayes's expression suggested he found the explanation insufficient for the level of skill Kate had just demonstrated. "Rural hunting doesn't typically produce precision shooting at 100 yards with a pistol," Hayes said skeptically. "That kind of accuracy requires specialized training." Carter watched the exchange with growing interest, recognizing that Hayes was pushing toward territory that Kate clearly wanted to avoid. There was tension in Kate's posture now, a subtle tightening that suggested the conversation was approaching dangerous ground. "I've always been interested in marksmanship, sir," Kate said carefully. "I've done some competitive shooting and taken advanced courses." Hayes nodded slowly, but his expression remained unconvinced. "What kind of competitive shooting? Local matches? Regional competitions?" Each question pushed deeper into territory that Kate couldn't navigate safely. Her competitive shooting had been at national levels, setting records that were still talked about in precision shooting circles. Acknowledging that background would lead to questions about her military experience that she couldn't answer without revealing her true identity. "Various local and regional events, sir," Kate replied, maintaining her careful neutrality. Hayes was about to pursue the questioning further when Lieutenant Carter interrupted. "Sir, if I may, Specialist Sullivan has demonstrated exceptional marksmanship capability. Perhaps we should focus on how to best utilize those skills rather than questioning their origin." Hayes turned to Carter with irritation at the interruption, but her suggestion carried enough logical appeal to deflect his interrogation momentarily. "Utilize her skills how, Lieutenant?" "Well, sir," Carter replied, her mind racing to protect Kate from further questioning while she processed what she'd witnessed. "Precision marksmanship is always valuable in training environments. Perhaps Specialist Sullivan could assist with advanced marksmanship instruction." Kate felt a chill at Carter's suggestion. Any assignment that would put her in a position to demonstrate her skills regularly would inevitably lead to recognition and questions she couldn't answer. Her 6 years of anonymity had depended on keeping her capabilities hidden, not showcasing them. "That's an interesting idea," Hayes said thoughtfully, his expression suggesting he was considering possibilities beyond simple training assistance. "Though I'd want to fully evaluate her capabilities before making any training assignments." The words carried implications that made Kate's stomach tighten. Hayes had moved beyond casual harassment into genuine interest in her abilities, which represented a different but equally dangerous threat to her anonymity. "Sir," Kate said carefully, "I'm quite comfortable with my current maintenance duties. I don't feel qualified for instruction responsibilities." Hayes looked at her with renewed interest. "After what I just witnessed, Sullivan, I think you're more qualified than you're letting on." His tone carried suspicion that made Kate's pulse quicken. "In fact, I'm beginning to wonder if there's quite a bit about your background that you haven't shared." The observation struck too close to the truth for comfort. Kate realized that her moment of defiance, her decision to demonstrate her true capabilities, had created exactly the kind of attention she'd spent years avoiding. Hayes was no longer seeing her as a target for casual cruelty, but as a mystery to be solved, which was infinitely more dangerous. Carter, watching the exchange, recognized that Kate was in genuine distress despite her controlled exterior. Something about Hayes's interest was threatening Kate in ways that went beyond simple job assignment concerns. Carter filed the observation away, adding it to her growing list of inconsistencies about Kate's background and reactions. "Perhaps," Carter said diplomatically, "we could arrange for a more comprehensive evaluation at a later time. After all, discovering exceptional talent among our personnel is always valuable, regardless of how that talent was acquired." Hayes nodded slowly, but his gaze remained fixed on Kate with calculating intensity. "Yes, I think a comprehensive evaluation would be very enlightening." He paused meaningfully. "I have a feeling there's quite a story behind those shooting skills, Sullivan, and I intend to find out what it is." Kate felt the walls of her carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crumble around her. 6 years of hiding had been threatened by a moment of justified pride, and now she faced the prospect of investigation that could uncover everything she'd worked to keep buried. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been betrayed once by Colonel Marcus Webb, a man she'd trusted completely who had sold operational intelligence for personal profit. Now she faced a different kind of betrayal, the potential exposure of her identity by her own skills and the attention of a man who saw her capabilities as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a person to be respected. Webb's betrayal had destroyed her career and identity once before. She'd trusted him with operational planning, relied on his tactical judgment, and never questioned the intelligence reports he provided during their deployment to Forward Operating Base Thunder. The base had been situated in a valley surrounded by mountains that provided perfect overwatch positions, and Kate had used those positions to devastating effect against Taliban forces who learned to fear the ghost. Her longest confirmed kill had come during what was supposed to be a routine helicopter extraction. At 1,847 meters, in crosswinds gusting to 25 miles per hour, she had eliminated a Taliban commander who was directing an attack on a downed American helicopter crew. The shot had required ballistic calculations that most snipers couldn't make under ideal conditions, but Kate had made it in seconds while under fire. What she hadn't known was that Webb had sold the helicopter's flight path to Taliban forces, turning the extraction mission into an ambush that killed 4 American soldiers. The helicopter hadn't been a victim of mechanical failure, as officially reported. It had been deliberately targeted using intelligence that Webb had provided to the highest bidder. When investigations began after the mission's failure, Webb had needed someone to blame for the intelligence leak that had led to American deaths. Kate's exceptional skills and isolated position made her perfect for the role. She was competent enough to be believably portrayed as reckless, but lacked the political connections to mount an effective defense against fabricated charges. The court-martial had been swift and devastating. Radio transcripts had been altered to show her ignoring orders. After-action reports had been falsified to describe reckless endangerment of friendly forces. Soldiers had been coerced into providing testimony that painted her as an uncontrollable operator who had compromised mission security through arrogance and insubordination. Captain Katherine, Ghost Sullivan, holder of multiple marksmanship records and decorated combat veteran, had been found guilty of charges that would have been impossible for anyone who actually knew her to believe. She'd been stripped of rank, forfeited all pay and allowances, and given a dishonorable discharge that would follow her forever. The only person who had believed in her innocence was General Patricia Morgan, a legendary soldier who had fought for women's equality in combat throughout her career. Morgan had discovered evidence of Webb's corruption and was prepared to testify on Kate's behalf, but Webb's network of influence had reached high enough to have Morgan suddenly reassigned to a NATO command in Germany. Her testimony ruled inadmissible due to her absence. Kate had left the military with nothing but determination to disappear completely. She'd changed her name, moved across the country, and spent months learning to suppress the skills that had once defined her identity. The transformation from Captain Katherine Ghost Sullivan to Kate Sullivan, maintenance technician, had been carefully planned and methodically executed. Now standing on Range 7 with Hayes studying her with calculating interest, Kate realized that her past was threatening to collide with her present in ways she'd never anticipated. Hayes represented the same kind of institutionalized arrogance and abuse of power that had enabled Webb's betrayal, but his interest in her capabilities rather than her destruction presented a different kind of threat. Carter continued to observe the interaction with growing concern, recognizing that Kate was facing something more serious than career implications. There was fear in Kate's controlled responses, a deep wariness that suggested her resistance to attention went beyond simple preference for anonymity. "Sir," Carter said carefully, "perhaps we should return to our scheduled duties. I believe Specialist Sullivan has demonstrated her capabilities sufficiently for today." Hayes looked at Carter with mild irritation. "Lieutenant, I think we're just getting started. In fact, I'd like to arrange for a more formal evaluation of Specialist Sullivan's abilities. Tomorrow morning, Range 7, with proper documentation and measurement." He turned back to Kate. "I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Kate felt the trap closing around her with mechanical precision. Each demonstration of competence led to more attention, and attention led to questions she couldn't answer without exposing the truth about her identity and background. The skills that had once been her greatest strength were becoming the instrument of her potential destruction. The ghost was being forced back into the light, and Kate realized that the reckoning she'd avoided for 6 years was finally approaching with the inevitability of a bullet finding its target. Part 5. The Forced Exile. That evening, Kate sat in her small apartment off base, staring at the only photograph she'd kept from her former life. The image showed her younger self in dress uniform, standing beside the flag at her graduation from sniper school, her face radiant with the confidence of someone who believed merit and dedication would always triumph over politics and corruption. The woman in that photograph had no idea that 3 years later, she would be sitting in civilian clothes in a sparse apartment, hiding from the very institution she had served with distinction. Kate's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The words made her blood run cold. Interesting demonstration today. Some capabilities are hard to hide forever. We should talk. A friend who remembers Afghanistan. She stared at the message, her mind racing through possibilities. Someone had recognized her, or at least suspected enough to make contact. The carefully constructed walls of anonymity she'd built were cracking, and she could feel the weight of her past pressing against them. She powered off the phone and walked to her small kitchen, mechanically preparing the same meal she'd eaten for 6 years. Routine had become armor, predictability a shield against a world that had proven capable of destroying everything she'd worked to build. But tonight, even familiar patterns couldn't quiet the storm of memories that Hayes's challenge had awakened. The apartment was Spartan by design, furnished with only necessities and devoid of personal touches that might reveal too much about its occupant. No awards, no photographs except the hidden one. No books beyond technical manuals that supported her cover identity. Kay had learned that invisibility required the complete suppression of personality, the transformation of a decorated war hero into a forgettable maintenance worker who existed at the margins of military society. But suppression had its costs. 6 years of denying her true capabilities had created an internal pressure that her demonstration at the range had only partially released. Every rifle she serviced reminded her of weapons she'd mastered in combat. Every training exercise she observed from the sidelines reminded her of missions she'd led with distinction. The constant reminders of her former competence had become a form of psychological torture that she'd learned to endure rather than overcome. Kate's reflection was interrupted by a knock at her door, soft but insistent. She approached carefully, checking through the peephole to see Lieutenant Carter standing in the hallway, her expression serious but not threatening. Kate hesitated, knowing that any conversation with Carter would risk further exposure, but refusing to answer would create its own suspicions. "Lieutenant Carter," Kate said as she opened the door, keeping her voice neutral. "Is there something I can help you with?" Carter glanced down the hallway to ensure they weren't being observed, then looked back at Kate with an intensity that made her defensive instincts flare. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." Kate stepped aside reluctantly, allowing Carter into her apartment while calculating potential responses to whatever questions might follow. Carter's presence represented a new variable in an already dangerous situation. Someone with enough intelligence and training to recognize inconsistencies that others might miss. Carter moved through the apartment's main room with the observational skills of someone trained in tactical assessment. Her eyes noted the sparse furnishings, the absence of personal items, and the general impression of temporary occupation rather than permanent residence. The apartment felt like a safe house rather than a home, lived in but not inhabited. "Interesting setup," Carter said finally, settling into one of the 2 chairs Kate owned. "Very minimalist." Kate remained standing near the door, maintaining easy access to exit if the conversation became too dangerous. I don't require much, Lieutenant. Simple living has its advantages. Carter nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by Kate's explanation. I wanted to discuss what happened at the range today. That was extraordinary shooting, particularly for someone whose background is supposedly limited to maintenance duties and recreational marksmanship. The direct approach caught Kate off guard. She'd expected subtle probing, careful questions designed to extract information without revealing the questioner's suspicions. Carter's directness suggested either tactical naivety or strategic confidence that Kate couldn't immediately assess. I've always been interested in precision shooting, Kate replied, falling back on the same carefully neutral response she'd used with Hayes. It's a technical challenge that appeals to me. Carter leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and evaluating. Kate, I've been shooting competitively since high school. I've trained with some of the best marksmen in the military. What you demonstrated today wasn't the result of recreational interest or technical curiosity. That was world-class precision shooting that takes years of professional-level training to develop. Kate felt the familiar tightening in her chest that accompanied moments when her carefully constructed identity faced serious challenge. Carter's assessment was accurate and delivered with the confidence of someone who knew enough about marksmanship to recognize true expertise when she saw it. I appreciate the compliment, Lieutenant, Kate said carefully, but I think you might be overestimating what you observed. Carter shook her head, her expression growing more serious. I'm not overestimating anything. I'm a graduate of the Advanced Marksmanship Unit. I know what exceptional shooting looks like, and more importantly, I know what kind of training produces those capabilities. She paused meaningfully. That wasn't self-taught or recreational shooting, Kate. That was combat-level precision marksmanship. The words hung in the air between them like rounds waiting to be fired. Kate realized that Carter had moved beyond suspicion into near certainty about her background, which represented a threat that couldn't be deflected with vague explanations or misdirection. What exactly are you suggesting, Lieutenant? Kate asked, her voice taking on an edge that she immediately regretted revealing. Carter's expression softened slightly, but her gaze remained steady. I'm suggesting that there's more to your background than maintenance duties and technical training. I'm suggesting that someone with your capabilities shouldn't be hiding in an armory, servicing weapons for others when you clearly have skills that could benefit training programs and operational units. Kate moved to the small window that overlooked the base's perimeter, putting distance between herself and Carter while she processed the implications of the conversation. Outside, the lights of Fort Davidson spread across the Colorado landscape, a constellation of purpose and activity that she observed but could never fully rejoin. Sometimes circumstances don't allow people to pursue the positions their capabilities might suggest, Kate said finally, her voice carrying undertones that Carter couldn't miss. Carter rose from her chair and approached the window, positioning herself where she could see Kate's profile while maintaining respectful distance. What circumstances would cause someone with your level of training to accept a position so far below their qualifications? The question struck at the heart of everything Kate had worked to keep buried. She could feel Carter's intelligence and perception pressing against the carefully constructed barriers she'd built around her past, testing for weaknesses that might reveal the truth she'd spent 6 years protecting. People make career choices for many reasons, Kate replied, maintaining her careful neutrality despite the growing pressure of the interrogation. Carter nodded slowly, but her expression indicated she wasn't satisfied with Kate's evasive responses. Kate, I've spent the evening thinking about what I observed today, and I've reached some conclusions that I think you should know about. Kate turned from the window to face Carter directly, recognizing that the conversation was approaching territory she couldn't navigate safely. What conclusions? First, Carter said, ticking off points on her fingers, your shooting demonstrated muscle memory and technique that takes thousands of hours to develop. Second, your equipment knowledge goes far beyond maintenance training into operational expertise. Third, your reactions to General Hayes's questioning suggested someone who has learned to guard their background very carefully. She paused. And fourth, your living situation looks like someone who's prepared to disappear at short notice. The assessment was devastatingly accurate, delivered with the analytical precision of someone trained in intelligence evaluation. Kate realized that Carter had spent considerable time analyzing not just her shooting, but her behavior, living arrangements, and responses to pressure. "You're very observant, Lieutenant," Kate said, her voice carrying warning that Carter seemed to recognize but not heed. Carter stepped closer, her expression growing more intense. "Kate, I don't know what happened to put someone with your capabilities in this situation, but I want you to know that not everyone in the military is like Hayes. There are people who would support you if they knew the truth about your background." The offer was delivered with sincerity that Kate found almost painful to hear. For 6 years, she'd lived with the isolation of knowing that her true story couldn't be told safely, that the evidence of her innocence had been buried beneath layers of corruption and lies. Carter's suggestion that support might be available felt like hope being offered to someone who had learned not to believe in redemption. "The truth about my background," Kate said slowly, "isn't something that can be shared safely." Carter's expression grew more serious. "What does that mean?" Kate moved back to her chair, suddenly feeling the weight of 6 years of secrecy pressing down on her. She'd never spoken about her past to anyone at Fort Davidson, had never even considered the possibility that someone might offer genuine support rather than exploitation or betrayal. "It means," Kate said carefully, "that sometimes the truth is more dangerous than comfortable lies." Carter settled back into her chair, her posture indicating she was prepared to listen to whatever Kate might be willing to share. "Dangerous to whom?" Kate studied Carter's face, searching for signs of the calculation and self-interest she'd learned to expect from military officers. What she saw instead was genuine concern and professional curiosity, untainted by personal agenda. "Lieutenant," Kate said finally, "why are you here? What do you hope to accomplish with these questions?" Carter's response came without hesitation. "Because watching Hayes humiliate you today made me angry. Because seeing someone with your capabilities hiding in an armory offends my sense of justice. And because I've spent 6 months watching Hayes abuse his authority, and I'm tired of seeing good people suffer while incompetent leaders advance through political connections." The answer carried conviction that Kate found surprisingly moving. Carter's anger at injustice resonated with her own suppressed outrage at the corruption that had destroyed her career and identity. Injustice is a common feature of military life, Kate replied, testing Carter's commitment to her stated principles. Carter's eyes flashed with anger. "It doesn't have to be. There are people in the military who still believe in merit over politics, who would fight to protect someone who's been wronged if they knew the truth." Kate felt something stir within her that she'd thought had died during her court-martial. The possibility that someone might believe her story, might be willing to support her against institutional pressure, awakened emotions she'd spent years learning to suppress. And if the truth involved accusations against senior officers? Kate asked carefully. If supporting someone meant challenging powerful people with connections throughout the military hierarchy? Carter's expression hardened with resolve. Then those are exactly the people who need to be challenged. Kate stood and walked to the small desk where she kept her few personal items. Hidden in a drawer behind technical manuals was a folder containing documents she'd never expected to show anyone. Newspaper clippings about Operation Iron Storm, copies of her military records from before the court-martial, and a single photograph of her with her unit before everything fell apart. She returned to Carter with the folder in her hands, weighing the risks of revelation against the possibility of finding someone who might understand the truth about her situation. "Lieutenant," Kate said, her voice carrying new gravity. If I were to tell you that everything you think you know about my background is carefully constructed fiction, would you be prepared to hear a story that might change your opinion of military justice and institutional integrity? Carter leaned forward, her expression growing intense. Yes. Kate opened the folder and removed the photograph, handing it to Carter without explanation. The image showed a young woman in combat gear, surrounded by soldiers in a desert environment. All of them wearing the insignia and equipment of elite special operations forces. Carter studied the photograph carefully, her eyes moving from face to face before settling on the woman at the center of the group. Recognition dawned gradually, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to shock. "This is you," Carter said quietly, her voice carrying amazement. "But this is—" She looked at the unit insignia and equipment more carefully. "This is a special operations unit. Elite sniper team." Kate nodded slowly. "That photograph was taken 3 weeks before Operation Iron Storm, a mission that was supposed to be a routine helicopter extraction, but turned into an ambush that killed 4 American soldiers." Carter's training in military history made the name instantly recognizable. Iron Storm was a major intelligence failure. The mission commander was court-martialed for reckless endangerment and incompetence. Kate's smile was bitter and filled with pain. The mission commander was Captain Kate Sullivan, the woman you're looking at in that photograph. And I should know, because Captain Kate Sullivan was me. Carter stared at Kate with an expression of complete shock, the photograph trembling slightly in her hands as the implications of Kate's revelation began to sink in. You were Captain Sullivan, the sniper who held the record for longest confirmed kill, who led 6 successful deep penetration missions, who was court-martialed for the deaths of 4 soldiers in an ambush that I had nothing to do with creating." Kate's voice carried 6 years of suppressed pain and anger. Captain Katherine Sullivan died in that court-martial, Lieutenant. Kate Sullivan, the maintenance technician, was born from her ashes. Carter set the photograph on the small table between them, her hands shaking slightly as she processed what Kate had revealed. "But the court-martial records, the evidence of your misconduct, was fabricated by Colonel Marcus Webb, my commanding officer, who was selling operational intelligence to Taliban forces for personal profit." Kate's voice grew harder. Webb needed a scapegoat when investigations began after Iron Storm failed. I was convenient, isolated, and skilled enough to be believably portrayed as someone whose competence had become arrogance. Carter's expression cycled through shock, anger, and something approaching horror as she understood the scope of what Kate was describing. "You're telling me that you were framed for an intelligence leak that caused American deaths? That your commanding officer was the actual traitor?" Kate nodded, her expression grim. "Webb confessed to General Patricia Morgan 3 years ago, shortly before he died of cancer. But his confession was classified to protect the integrity of ongoing operations and the careers of officers who had been involved in covering up his crimes." Carter stood and began pacing the small room, her mind racing to process the implications of Kate's story. "If this is true, then you've been living in exile for something you didn't do. Your career, your reputation, your entire identity was destroyed to protect a corrupt system." Kate watched Carter's reaction with careful attention, searching for signs that the young officer's idealism might give way to the calculating self-interest she'd learned to expect from military personnel. What she saw instead was genuine outrage and determination that reminded her of her own younger self. "Now you understand," Kate said quietly, "why the truth about my background can't be shared safely. Why someone with my capabilities chooses to hide in an armory rather than seek positions that would showcase my abilities." Carter stopped pacing and turned to face Kate directly. "But you have proof. You have documents, testimony from General Morgan." Kate shook her head sadly. "I have classified information that I'm not supposed to possess, obtained through channels that could be construed as illegal. General Morgan's testimony would be inadmissible because she obtained webs. Confession under conditions that wouldn't meet legal standards for evidence. Carter's expression grew more determined rather than discouraged. Then we find other evidence. We build a case that can't be dismissed or suppressed. Kate felt a flutter of something she'd thought was dead, hope mixed with terror at the possibility that her story might finally be heard by someone with the power to act on it. "Lieutenant," Kate said carefully, "you're talking about challenging senior officers, questioning closed cases, and potentially exposing corruption that reaches high levels of military command. Are you prepared for the consequences of that kind of investigation?" Carter's response came without hesitation. "If it means correcting an injustice this massive, yes." Kate studied Carter's face, searching for any sign of the doubt or self-interest that would make trusting her dangerous. What she found instead was the kind of moral courage she'd once possessed herself, before betrayal and exile had taught her to expect the worst from human nature. "Then," Kate said slowly, "we need to discuss what really happened during Operation Iron Storm, and why 4 good soldiers died, because a corrupt colonel valued money more than American lives." The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity of Colorado mountain air, but Kate felt none of its refreshing promise. She'd spent the night alternating between moments of hope at Carter's offer of support and waves of terror at the prospect of her carefully guarded secret becoming known. Throughout Fort Davidson, by agreeing to meet Carter at 0600 hours in the secure conference room of the administrative building, Kate had crossed a line she'd maintained for 6 years. There would be no returning to simple anonymity after today. Carter was already waiting. When Kate arrived, accompanied by 2 individuals Kate didn't recognize, her defensive instincts flared immediately, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic error in trusting the young lieutenant. But Carter's first words eased her concerns while introducing new complications. "Kate, I'd like you to meet Major Sarah Chun from the Inspector General's office and Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres from Criminal Investigation Division." Carter's voice carried nervous energy that matched Kate's own apprehension. "I reached out through secure channels last night after our conversation. They've been investigating irregularities in several cases from the Afghanistan deployment." Period. Major Chun was a compact woman in her 40s whose sharp eyes and direct manner suggested someone accustomed to cutting through institutional obfuscation. Torres appeared older, his weathered face carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd spent decades investigating military personnel. Both wore expressions of professional interest mixed with skepticism. "Ms. Sullivan," Chun began, her voice carrying formal authority, "Lieutenant Carter has shared some preliminary information about your background and allegations concerning Operation Iron Storm. Before we proceed, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded and may be used in official proceedings." Kate nodded, having expected as much. "I understand, Major. I also understand that what I'm about to share could be construed as possession of classified information obtained through unauthorized channels." Torres leaned forward slightly. "We're aware of the legal complexities involved. Our primary concern is determining whether crimes were committed and whether they can be substantiated with admissible evidence." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "We're also aware that victims of institutional injustice sometimes possess information they shouldn't have because official channels failed to protect them." The acknowledgement of her position carried more understanding than Kate had expected from military investigators. She'd anticipated skepticism, challenges to her credibility, and immediate focus on how she'd obtained information about Webb's activities. Instead, Chun and Torres seemed prepared to listen to her story before making judgments about its validity. Carter activated a secure recording device and nodded to Kate. "Please start with your background and how you came to be assigned to Operation Iron Storm." Kate began with her childhood in Iowa, her early development as a marksman, and her military Career through the point where she'd been selected for the elite sniper program. Chun and Torres listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but allowing Kate to establish the foundation of her expertise and credibility. When Kate reached the deployment to Forward Operating Base Thunder, her voice took on the precise tone of someone delivering an after-action report. FOB Thunder was positioned in a valley that provided excellent overwatch positions for precision shooting. My unit's mission was to provide sniper support for special operations and to conduct reconnaissance and target elimination in support of conventional forces. She described her relationship with Colonel Webb, the trust she'd placed in his tactical judgment, and the intelligence reports he'd provided that had made her missions possible. Webb was considered one of the finest tactical commanders in the theater. His intelligence was always accurate, his mission planning was meticulous, and his concern for soldier welfare seemed genuine. Torres interrupted for the first time. You had no reason to suspect that Webb might be compromising operational security? Kate shook her head. None whatsoever. If anything, I thought he was overly cautious about security protocols. He insisted on additional verification procedures for mission planning and maintained strict compartmentalization of intelligence information. Her voice carried bitter irony. What I didn't realize was that he was protecting his source network, not our operational security. Chun made a note and gestured for Kate to continue. Kate's description of Operation Iron Storm began with the mission briefing and planning phases, establishing the legitimate operational objectives and the intelligence that had supported the mission's approval. The extraction was supposed to be routine, Kate continued. A helicopter crew had gone down during a supply run, and we were tasked with reaching them before Taliban forces could capture or kill the survivors. She paused, her expression growing grim. What we didn't know was that Webb had sold the helicopter's flight path to Taliban commanders, effectively guaranteeing that it would be shot down in a location that would require American forces to respond. Carter's sharp intake of breath was audible in the small room. Chun's expression remained professionally neutral, but Torres showed visible anger at Kate's revelation. The Taliban forces were waiting for us, Kate continued. Not just waiting, but positioned with detailed knowledge of our likely approach routes and tactical capabilities. They had acquired intelligence about our unit's composition, equipment, and standard operating procedures. Kate described the mission's progression in tactical detail, from the initial helicopter insertion to the discovery that they were walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Her account included radio communications, tactical decisions, and the moment-by-moment progression of events that had led to the deaths of 4 American soldiers. My longest shot during the mission was at 1,847 meters, eliminating a Taliban commander who was directing the ambush from a concealed position. Kate's voice carried professional pride despite the painful context. The shot allowed us to extract the remaining helicopter crew and prevented additional casualties, but 4 soldiers had already died in the initial ambush. Torres looked up from his notes. The court-martial records indicate that you ignored direct orders and led your unit into an obvious trap. How do you respond to those allegations? Kate's expression hardened. The radio transcripts presented at my court-martial were altered. Communications logs were falsified to show me receiving warnings that were never transmitted. After-action reports were modified to suggest reckless decision-making that never occurred. She paused, meeting Torres's gaze directly. I can provide technical details about the alterations that would be impossible to know without access to the original communications. Chun leaned forward with renewed interest. What kind of technical details? Kate pulled out a folder sheet, brought containing copies of documents she'd obtained through sources she couldn't reveal safely. Timestamps were adjusted using software that leaves specific digital fingerprints. Radio frequencies were listed that weren't available to our equipment at that location. Geographic coordinates were changed using editing protocols that were standard for that time period, but have since been updated. She spread several pages across the conference table, pointing to specific entries and technical specifications. These alterations would be virtually undetectable to someone without extensive experience in communication security and digital forensics. But they're obvious to anyone who understands the systems that were actually in use during that deployment. Torres examined the documents with the careful attention of someone trained in evidence analysis. How did you obtain copies of these original communications logs? Kate's voice grew cautious. Through contacts who believed in my innocence and were willing to risk their careers to preserve evidence that might someday be useful for clearing my name. Chun and Torres exchanged glances, recognizing the legal complexity of evidence obtained through unauthorized channels. But the technical detail Kate had provided suggested knowledge that would be difficult to fabricate or obtain without access to genuine source material. Let's assume for the moment that your allegations about falsified evidence are accurate, Chun said carefully. What motivated Webb to target you specifically for his frame-up? Kate's expression grew bitter. I was convenient, skilled enough to be believably portrayed as someone whose competence had become arrogance, but isolated enough to be eliminated without significant resistance. She paused. I was also a woman in a male-dominated field, which made it easier for people to believe that I might have acted recklessly to prove myself. Carter, who had remained silent during most of Kate's account, spoke up. What about General Morgan? You mentioned that she had evidence of Webb's confession. Kate nodded. General Morgan discovered irregularities in Webb's financial records during a routine audit 3 years ago. When she confronted him, he was already dying of cancer and decided to confess rather than take his secrets to the grave. She paused, but his confession implicated other officers who were still in positions of authority, so it was classified to protect ongoing operations and institutional integrity. Torres looked up sharply. Do you have access to Morgan's investigation? Files? Kate shook her head. Only summary information provided by sources who were involved in the initial investigation. The complete files remain classified above my clearance level. Chun made several notes, then looked directly at Kate. Miss Sullivan, assuming we can verify the technical evidence you've provided and establish the validity of your allegations, what outcome are you seeking? Reinstatement? Financial compensation? Public vindication? The question caught Kate off guard. She'd spent so much time focused on survival and concealment that she hadn't seriously considered what justice might look like if it were actually achievable. I'm not sure, Kate replied honestly. 6 years ago, I would have said I wanted my rank restored, my record cleared, and the opportunity to continue serving. Now, she paused, searching for words to express the complex emotions that had developed during her exile. Now I'm not sure I could trust the institution enough to return to it. Carter looked surprised. But if your name were cleared, if everyone knew the truth about what happened, wouldn't you want to resume your career? Kate's smile was sad but resolute. Lieutenant, I've learned that vindication and justice aren't always the same thing. Having the truth acknowledged doesn't undo 6 years of exile or resurrect the trust that was destroyed by betrayal. Torres closed his notebook and looked at Kate with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal respect. Miss Sullivan, based on what you've shared today, I believe there's sufficient grounds for reopening the Iron Storm investigation. The technical evidence you've provided can be verified independently, and several aspects of your account align with irregularities we've identified in other cases from that time period. Chun nodded agreement. However, I need to be clear about the challenges we'll face. Some evidence may be inadmissible due to how it was obtained. Key witnesses may be unavailable or unwilling to testify. And there will be institutional resistance to reopening a case that's been closed for 6 years. Kate felt a complex mixture of hope and apprehension. What would the process involve? Formal investigation by CID, review of all available evidence, interviews with surviving personnel from the operation, and technical analysis of the communications and documentary evidence, Torres replied. If we can establish probable cause for criminal charges, the case would be referred to appropriate legal authorities. Chun added, the process could take months or even years, and success isn't guaranteed. You would need to be prepared for intense scrutiny, challenges to your credibility, and potential retaliation from officers who were involved in the original cover-up. Kate considered the implications carefully. And if I choose not to cooperate with an official investigation, then you continue living under the shadow of a fraudulent conviction, and the officers responsible for framing you continue their careers without consequences, Carter said with quiet intensity. Is that the outcome you want? Kate looked around the conference room at the three officers who were offering her something she'd never expected to receive, the possibility of official vindication and justice. The offer represented everything she'd dreamed of during her darkest moments of exile, but it also threatened the carefully constructed anonymity that had become her refuge from a hostile world. I need time to consider this, Kate said finally. The decision to cooperate with an official investigation would change my life completely, regardless of the outcome. Chun nodded understanding. Take the time you need. But I should mention that recent events at Fort Davidson may have reduced your options for maintaining anonymity. Kate felt a chill of recognition. What do you mean? Torres consulted his notes. General Hayes has been asking questions about your background following your demonstration at the range yesterday. He's contacted personnel offices at several bases trying to trace your service history prior to your assignment here. The news hit Kate like a physical blow. Hayes's interest in her capabilities had evolved into active investigation of her background, which would inevitably lead to discovery of her true identity. Carter looked stricken. I'm sorry, Kate. I didn't realize Hayes would pursue this so aggressively. Kate shook her head. It's not your fault. I knew the risks when I decided to demonstrate my abilities. She paused, processing the implications of Hayes's investigation. How long before he discovers the truth about my identity? Torres consulted his tablet. Based on the inquiries he's made so far, probably within 48 hours. He's already requested your complete service record and is comparing your current assignment history with gaps in the records of discharged personnel from the time period. Kate realized that her carefully maintained exile was ending whether she cooperated with the official investigation or not. Hayes's curiosity would expose her true identity, which would lead to questions she couldn't answer safely without official support. It seems, Kate said quietly, that the decision is being made for me. Chun leaned forward. Not necessarily. If you cooperate with our investigation, we can provide official protection during the process. If Hayes discovers your identity independently, you'll face his questions without any institutional support or legal protection. The choice, when viewed in those terms, was clear. Kate could face exposure and questioning as a fugitive from military justice, or she could voluntarily cooperate with an investigation that might clear her name and hold her real betrayers accountable. All right, Kate said, her voice carrying new resolve. I'll cooperate with your investigation. But I have conditions. Torres nodded. What conditions? First, I want protection for anyone who provided me with information about Webb's activities. They risked their careers to preserve evidence that might someday clear my name. Kate's voice grew firm. Second, I want the investigation to focus on accountability for all officers involved in the cover-up, not just Webb. The system that enabled his betrayal included other people who should face consequences. Chun made notes as Kate spoke. Agreed. What else? Third, I want the results of the investigation to be made public regardless of whether criminal charges are filed. The truth about what happened should be available to anyone who wants to understand how institutional corruption can destroy innocent lives. Carter looked at Kate with admiration. "You're not just seeking personal vindication. You're trying to prevent this from happening to other people." Kate nodded. "Exactly. My career is gone, and 6 years of my life can't be recovered. But maybe the truth about what happened can prevent other soldiers from facing this same betrayal." Torres closed his tablet and stood. "Miss Sullivan, you have our commitment to a thorough and fair investigation. We'll begin immediately with verification of the technical evidence you've provided." Chun also rose. "I'll arrange for official protection during the investigation process and coordinate with base security to manage any interference from General Hayes." As the meeting concluded, Kate felt the strange sensation of a massive weight lifting from her shoulders while an equally heavy burden of uncertainty settled in its place. After 6 years of hiding, she was about to become visible again, but in ways she couldn't predict or control. Carter lingered as the investigators left. "Kate, are you all right with this decision?" Kate considered the question carefully. "I'm terrified," she replied honestly, "but I'm also relieved. I've been running from the truth for 6 years, and it's exhausting. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting." The investigation that followed unfolded with the methodical precision of experienced military investigators who understood the stakes involved. Torres and his team verified Kate's technical evidence within 72 hours, confirming that communications logs had been systematically altered and documentary evidence had been falsified. The digital fingerprints Kate had identified proved accurate, providing concrete proof of tampering that couldn't be explained by innocent error. Chun's team worked in parallel to trace Webb's financial records and communications, building a comprehensive picture of his intelligence selling network and the scope of his betrayal. What they discovered exceeded even Kate's allegations, revealing a systematic pattern of corruption that had compromised multiple operations and cost dozens of American lives. General Morgan, contacted in Germany, provided detailed testimony about Webb's deathbed confession and the evidence she'd gathered before being reassigned. Her investigation files, declassified under court order, contained documentation that corroborated Kate's account and implicated 3 other officers in the cover-up that had destroyed her career. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Webb had kept detailed records of his intelligence sales, apparently as insurance against his co-conspirators. The encrypted files found on a computer in his personal effects contained transaction records, communications with Taliban contacts, and explicit references to the plan to frame Kate for his own crimes. Hayes's parallel investigation into Kate's background had indeed led him to discover her true identity, but when he attempted to use that information to discredit her, he found himself facing questions from seat investigators about his own conduct and motivations. His harassment of Kate, documented through witness statements and video records, became part of a broader pattern of abuse of authority that ultimately ended his military career. The court-martial that reconvened to address Kate's case 6 months later was everything the original proceedings had not been: thorough, fair, and focused on evidence rather than politics. Kate testified for 3 days, walking the court through every aspect of Operation Iron Storm and the conspiracy that had followed. The moment of vindication, when it came, felt both overwhelming and anticlimactic. Captain Kate Sullivan was posthumously restored to full honor, her record cleared of all charges, and her achievements recognized with decorations that had been denied during her exile. The officers responsible for framing her faced court-martial proceedings of their own, with sentences ranging from dismissal from service to imprisonment for their roles in the conspiracy. But Kate herself chose a different path forward. When offered full reinstatement with promotion and back pay, she declined, choosing instead to accept an honorable discharge and disability compensation for the psychological trauma she'd endured. The military that had betrayed her was prepared to welcome her back, but she was no longer prepared to trust an institution that had proven capable of such systematic injustice. Instead, Kate founded the Kate Sullivan Center for Military Justice, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting service members who faced retaliation for reporting misconduct or who had been wrongfully accused of crimes. The center provided legal support, investigation services, and advocacy for soldiers who found themselves isolated within their own institution. Carter, promoted to captain following her role in exposing the Iron Storm conspiracy, became the center's military liaison, using her position to identify cases where institutional corruption threatened individual soldiers. Her idealism, tempered by the harsh reality she'd witnessed, evolved into effective advocacy that helped dozens of service members navigate challenges similar to what Kate had faced. The ghost of Captain Katherine Sullivan had finally been laid to rest, replaced not by a restored military officer, but by someone who understood that true service sometimes meant standing outside the institution to hold it accountable. Kate's precision shooting skills found new purpose in training programs for law enforcement and security personnel, while her experience with military justice reform made her a sought-after consultant and expert witness. 5 years after her vindication, Kate stood on a shooting range in Montana, watching a group of former military personnel work through advanced marksmanship training. Among her students were veterans who had been wrongfully discharged, whistleblowers who had faced retaliation, and soldiers whose careers had been ended by corruption and abuse of authority. Remember, Kate called to her students, precision shooting is about more than hitting targets. It's about understanding your capabilities, trusting your training, and having the courage to take the shot when it matters most. Her words carried meaning that extended far beyond marksmanship. Kate had learned that courage wasn't just about facing enemy fire in combat. It was about standing up to institutional betrayal, fighting for truth when lies were more comfortable, and refusing to let corrupt systems define your worth. The phone in her office buzzed with a text message from Carter. New case in Texas. Female sergeant reporting harassment, facing retaliation. Sound familiar? Kate smiled and typed back, I'll take the case. Some fights are worth having. Outside her window, the mountains stretched toward horizons that had once seemed impossibly distant. Kate had learned to measure success not by rank or recognition, but by the number of people she could help navigate the same challenges that had once nearly destroyed her. The ghost was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important targets weren't on distant ranges, but in the systems and attitudes that needed to be changed to protect those who served with honor. Her precision had been restored, not just in her shooting, but in her understanding of what mattered most. Justice, truth, and the courage to fight for both, even when the odds seemed impossible. Kate Sullivan had found her target at last, and she intended to keep firing until every shot counted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.